The fastest way to discover who someone really is isn't to watch how they treat powerful people. It's to watch how they treat the person bringing their dinner. The dinner rush hit like a tidal wave every Friday night. Plates clattered. Glasses chimed. Conversations blended into a steady wall of noise beneath the warm glow of hanging Edison bulbs. I balanced a tray loaded with burgers, fries, and iced teas as I moved between crowded tables at Miller's Grill, a family-owned restaurant on the north side of Chicago. At 29 years old, I had mastered the art of smiling through exhaustion. 12-hour shifts tended to teach you that. My feet ached. My shoulders were tight. And my bank account was still recovering from my mother's latest medical bill. But bills didn't care whether you were tired. They just kept showing up. Emily, table 14 needs a refill. My manager called from behind the register. Got it, I answered, forcing another smile. The smell of grilled onions and fresh coffee filled the air. Outside, rain streaked down the restaurant windows in silver lines, turning the city lights into blurry patches of gold and red. It should have been an ordinary night. Then the black SUVs arrived. I noticed them through the front windows before anyone else did. 3 identical vehicles pulled up to the curb. Expensive. Polished. Out of place in a neighborhood where most people drove pickup trucks or aging sedans. The restaurant door opened. A gust of cold air swept inside. Every conversation seemed to soften by a fraction. Not stop. Just shift. The way people unconsciously react when someone important enters a room. The man who stepped inside looked like he belonged in a completely different world. Tall. Impeccably dressed. Dark tailored coat. Sharp features. Controlled expression. He wasn't movie star handsome. He was something more intimidating. The kind of man who never appeared uncertain. Never looked rushed. Never seemed surprised. Several men followed him inside. Equally well dressed. Equally serious. They took a corner table without needing to be directed. The entire group moved with quiet confidence that made everyone else seem louder by comparison. You take them, my manager whispered. Probably some corporate executives. I grabbed menus and walked over. Good evening, I said. Welcome to Miller's. Can I start you off with drinks? The man looked up from his phone. His eyes met mine for exactly 1 second before returning to the menu. Coffee, he said. His voice was calm, precise. Black. The others placed their orders. I wrote everything down and headed toward the kitchen. Nothing unusual. Until I returned 10 minutes later. I was setting down coffee cups when one of the men asked something in Arabic. The tall man answered without looking at me. The others laughed quietly. I froze. Not because I felt threatened. Because I understood every word. My grandmother had immigrated from Lebanon before I was born. Growing up, Arabic-filled family dinners, holiday gatherings, and long phone calls with relatives overseas. I hadn't spoken it much in years. But I understood it perfectly. The man took another sip of coffee and said in Arabic, "She hides her disappointments behind a smile." Some people spend their entire lives pretending they're happy. A few of his associates chuckled. Another added something I barely heard because my pulse had suddenly become very loud. Most people would have walked away. Pretended not to understand. Avoided the confrontation. Instead, I slowly set down the last coffee cup. Then I answered him in fluent Arabic. And some people insult strangers in another language because they lack the courage to say it in English. Silence crashed over the table. Every head turned toward me. The man finally looked up. Really looked up. For the first time all evening, his expression changed. Not anger. Not embarrassment.
Surprise. Genuine surprise.
I held his gaze. If you think someone deserves criticism, I continued calmly, still speaking Arabic, the brave thing is to say it where they can hear it. Otherwise, that's not confidence. That's cowardice. The restaurant seemed to stop breathing. One of his associates nearly dropped his coffee. Another stared at me as if I had just performed a magic trick. The tall man remained completely still. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time since he walked through the door, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't friendly. But it was real. And somehow that felt far more dangerous than if he had gotten angry. The smile disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Adrian Khalil leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of focus that made the rest of the room seem distant. Around us, conversations slowly resumed. Forks clinked against plates. Ice rattled in glasses. But something had changed. Everyone at that table knew it. So did I. I should have walked away feeling victorious. Instead, I felt strangely unsettled. As I returned to the kitchen, my coworker Jenna nearly collided with me carrying a tray of desserts. "Emily," she whispered. "What was that?" I grabbed a stack of clean menus and pretended not to notice her wide eyes. "A conversation." "That was not a conversation." She glanced toward the corner table. "Who are those guys?"
No idea.
The truth was I did have an idea. Men like Adrian existed in every city. Powerful, wealthy, untouchable. The kind of people whose names appeared in business magazines and charity galas. The kind of people who never expected resistance from anyone, especially not a waitress carrying coffee refills. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I took orders, delivered meals, cleared tables. Yet every time I crossed the dining room, I could feel Adrian watching. Not constantly, not obviously, but enough. It was like sensing a spotlight in a dark theater. By 10 o'clock, the crowd had thinned. Rain still tapped softly against the windows. A few customers lingered over pie and coffee while the staff began their closing routines. Adrian and his associates remained seated. No one seemed eager to leave. Finally, he stood. The movement alone drew attention. His companions rose immediately. The bill had already been paid. Of course it had. Men like him never waited for checks. I was wiping down a nearby table when he approached. My pulse quickened despite my determination not to care. Close, he seemed even taller. More composed. "Emily Carter," he said. I froze. Hearing my full name caught me off guard. "That is my name. Your Arabic is impressive." "Thank you." Most people would not have answered. Most people do not enjoy being insulted. One corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Fair point. The response surprised me more than the apology I secretly expected. There was no argument.
No defensiveness.
Just acknowledgement. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he glanced around the restaurant. "You work hard." I almost laughed. That is a strange observation. It is an accurate one. I folded my arms. "Is there a reason you are still here?" His eyes met mine again. Calm. Direct. Curiosity. "About what?" "You." I shook my head immediately. "That sounds like a terrible use of your time." To my surprise, he laughed. A real laugh this time. Quiet but genuine. Several of his associates looked startled, as if they had not heard that sound often. "You always answer questions with questions," he asked. "Only when strangers make comments about my life." The restaurant lights reflected softly against the rain-covered glass behind him. For a second, the powerful businessman disappeared, and I caught a glimpse of something else. Someone tired. Someone carrying invisible weight. The impression vanished almost instantly. "Good night, Emily Carter," he said. "Good night." He nodded once and headed for the exit. The door opened. Cold air rushed inside. Then he was gone. The black SUVs disappeared into the rainy Chicago night. I stared through the window until the taillights vanished around the corner. "Please tell me that was not flirting," Jenna said from behind me. I grabbed a spray bottle and resumed cleaning the table. "Trust me," I said. "That man does not know how to flirt." Yet as I locked the restaurant doors an hour later and stepped into the cool night air, I could not stop thinking about the look in his eyes when he said he was curious. And somehow that bothered me more than the insult ever had. Some people leave an impression. Others leave a question. Adrian Khalil somehow managed to leave both. The following Tuesday started like every other shift. The coffee machine broke 15 minutes after opening. A customer complained that her pancakes were too fluffy. Someone dropped an entire tray of orange juice near the entrance. Normal chaos.
Familiar chaos.
The kind that kept my mind occupied and my bills paid. By noon, I had almost stopped thinking about the man from Friday night. Almost. Then Jenna appeared beside me holding a small black envelope. "This came for you." I frowned. "For me? Your name is literally written on the front." I took it carefully. The paper was thick. Expensive. The kind of stationery nobody used unless they wanted to make a statement. Inside was a single card. No letter. No explanation. Just an invitation to a charity fundraiser benefiting pediatric hospitals across Chicago. The event was being held downtown at one of the most exclusive hotels in the city. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Thought you might enjoy attending something different. Adrian. I stared at the card for several seconds. No, Jenna immediately grabbed my arm. What do you mean no? I mean absolutely not. Emily, do you realize how expensive those events are? Which is exactly why I do not belong there. I folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. Besides, I did not ask for it. Jenna looked personally offended by my decision. You are turning down a free night in a ballroom because you are stubborn. Correct. You are impossible. Maybe I was. But something about accepting the invitation felt wrong. Like stepping onto a playing field where all the rules belonged to someone else. By evening, I had almost convinced myself the matter was finished. Then Adrian walked through the restaurant doors. Again, the rain had returned, painting the windows with silver streaks. He arrived alone this time.
No entourage.
No group of associates. Just him. Several customers glanced up. Most quickly returned to their meals. I grabbed a menu and approached his table before anyone else could. You know we have other restaurants in Chicago, right? His eyes lifted from the menu. I am aware. Yet here you are. The coffee is good. That is a lie. A faint smile appeared. Perhaps. I set a cup in front of him. I received your invitation. And I am not going. He nodded once. To my surprise, he looked neither disappointed nor annoyed. That is your choice. You are taking that surprisingly well. You expected an argument? Honestly? A little. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Emily, respect only means something when it is voluntary. The answer caught me off guard. Before I could respond, an elderly customer near the front register struggled to lift a heavy box she had brought inside to stay dry from the weather. Without hesitation, I crossed the room and helped her carry it to a nearby booth. The woman thanked me 3 times. When I returned, Adrian was watching quietly. What? I asked. Nothing. That was definitely a something. He looked down into his coffee. You help people when nobody is watching. I shrugged. Most people do. No, he said softly. Most people think they do. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, headlights reflected across the wet pavement. Inside, the restaurant hummed with ordinary life. Yet somehow the space between us felt different than it had 4 days earlier. Less like a confrontation. More like the beginning of a conversation neither of us fully understood. The first snow of the season arrived 3 days later. Tiny white flakes drifted across the Chicago skyline and melted against the restaurant windows before they could settle. I was carrying a tray of hot chocolate and coffee when my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. Normally I ignored personal calls during work. This time I could not. It was the clinic. My stomach tightened immediately. I stepped into the hallway beside the storage room and answered. Emily Carter speaking. The nurse on the other end sounded kind but exhausted. Your mother missed her appointment this morning. I closed my eyes. She told me she was going. She scheduled transportation but never arrived. I thanked her and hung up. For several seconds I stood there staring at the faded beige wall. My mother had always been stubborn. The older she became, the worse it got. She hated depending on anyone. Hated being treated like she was fragile. Unfortunately, pride did not pay medical bills or get people to appointments. Everything okay? I nearly jumped. Adrian stood at the end of the hallway, holding a coffee cup. I had not even noticed him enter the restaurant. You have a talent for appearing unexpectedly, I said. Occupational habit. That sounds mysterious. That is because it is. Despite myself, I smiled. Then the smile disappeared. Adrian noticed immediately. He always noticed. Bad news? He asked quietly. I looked away. Just life. Most people would have accepted that answer. Adrian did not push, but he did not leave either. Sometimes life is expensive, he said. The words caught me off guard because they were exactly right. Not dramatic. Not poetic. Just true. Life was expensive. Rent, groceries, prescriptions, appointments, repairs. Every month felt like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. You have no idea, I replied. Something flickered behind his eyes. Amusement mixed with something else. You would be surprised. Before I could respond, my manager called my name from across the dining room. I returned to work and tried to push the conversation aside. Yet throughout the afternoon, I kept noticing Adrian sitting quietly at his usual table. He was not working, not taking calls, not meeting clients, just sitting there with coffee and a book. A real book. Hardcover. Dog-eared pages. Somehow that surprised me more than anything else. By closing time he was still there. The last customers filtered out into the snowy evening. Chairs were stacked. Lights dimmed. I grabbed my coat and prepared for the long bus ride home. Outside, the wind cut through my jacket immediately. Snow swirled beneath streetlights like silver dust. Emily. I turned. Adrian stood beside a black SUV parked across the street. What? He hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was the first uncertain movement I had ever seen from him. Your mother. Is she okay? The question was so unexpected that I forgot to be defensive. She will be. He nodded slowly. Good. Neither of us moved. Cars rolled past on the wet street. Somewhere a train horn echoed through the night. Finally I laughed softly. You know, for someone who claims to be curious, you ask surprisingly few questions. To my surprise, Adrian smiled. That is because the important answers are usually volunteered. Then he opened the SUV door and disappeared inside. As the vehicle pulled away, I stood beneath the falling snow feeling more confused than ever. Because for the first time since meeting Adrian Khalil, I realized something unsettling. I was no longer trying to figure him out. I was starting to wonder if he was trying to figure me out too. The smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee filled the restaurant long before sunrise. Saturday mornings were different from dinner rushes. Slower. Softer. Families occupied corner booths. Couples lingered over breakfast. Regulars read newspapers while nursing endless cups of coffee. Usually I enjoyed those shifts. Usually they gave me time to breathe. That morning did not. A new waitress named Sophie had started 2 weeks earlier. She was 19, nervous, and constantly apologizing for things that were not her fault. I remember being exactly the same when I first started. Which was why I noticed immediately when a customer at table 6 began making her uncomfortable. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just endless complaints. Sharp comments.
Impossible request.
The kind of behavior designed to make someone feel small. Sophie kept trying. Refilling drinks. Replacing food. Smiling through every criticism. By 11 o'clock, she looked ready to cry. I was carrying a pot of coffee when I saw her standing near the kitchen entrance, blinking rapidly. Hey, I said quietly. You okay? She shook her head. I am fine. That answer usually means the opposite. Her laugh came out shaky. Before she could reply, the customer snapped his fingers from across the room. Sophie flinched. Something inside me immediately hardened. Stay here, I said. I walked across the dining room and approached the table. Good morning, I said politely. How can I help? The customer launched into another complaint about service. Another complaint about food. Another complaint about waiting 3 extra minutes for a refill. I listened. Nodded. Let him finish. Then I smiled. Sir, we are happy to fix any problem with your meal. But we are not going to speak to our staff disrespectfully. The table went silent. Nearby conversations softened. The customer looked surprised. Excuse me. You heard me. My voice remained calm. She is doing her job. If there is an issue, we will solve it. But kindness is not optional. For a second, I wondered if I had gone too far. Then the man looked around the restaurant and realized half the room had heard the exchange. His expression shifted. A few minutes later, he paid his bill and left without another complaint. When I returned to the kitchen, Sophie stared at me. You did not have to do that. Yes, I said. I did. She smiled for the first time all morning. The moment should have ended there. Except when I turned around, Adrian was sitting at his usual table. Watching. Of course he was. I walked over carrying a fresh cup of coffee. How long have you been there? I asked. Long enough. I set the cup down. Then you know I was not trying to cause a scene. I know. He looked toward the front windows where sunlight reflected off fresh snow piled along the sidewalk. You protected her. I shrugged. Anyone would have. Adrian studied me carefully. No. Anyone would tell themselves they would. The distinction lingered between us. For several moments neither of us spoke. Finally he leaned back in his chair. Do you know what fascinates me about you, Emily? I groaned softly. This should be interesting. A rare smile appeared. You never seem to realize when you are teaching people something. I laughed despite myself. Trust me. I am definitely not teaching anyone anything. His expression softened. I disagree. For the first time since meeting him, there was no challenge in his voice. No amusement. No curiosity. Only respect. And somehow that unsettled me far more than any argument ever could. The wind rattled the restaurant windows all afternoon. Gray clouds hung low over Chicago, turning the city into a watercolor painting of steel, glass, and snow. Business had been unusually slow, which meant I had too much time to think. That was never a good thing. Ever since my conversation with Adrian that morning, his words kept replaying in my head. Respect. Curiosity. Observation. Somehow, a man who lived in a world completely different from mine seemed to understand parts of me that people I had known for years barely noticed. I was carrying a tray of sandwiches to a booth near the front when the restaurant door opened and a stranger stepped inside. He was well-dressed, probably in his late 40s, with a polished smile that never quite reached his eyes. Something about him immediately felt wrong. Not dangerous, just calculated. The kind of person who treated every conversation like a business transaction. He chose a table near the window and ordered coffee. Nothing unusual. Yet every few minutes I caught him watching me. By the third time I was certain. Can I get you anything else? I asked when I returned with a refill. Actually, he said smoothly, I was hoping to ask you a question. My stomach tightened. Depends on the question. His smile widened slightly. How well do you know Adrian Khalil? Every instinct I possess woke up at once. I kept my expression neutral. He is a customer. Just a customer? That is usually how restaurants work. The man laughed softly. Interesting. He slid a business card across the table. I did not touch it. I think you are mistaken about something, I said. I am not involved in anyone else's business. Sometimes involvement finds people whether they want it or not. The answer sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, the front door opened again. I glanced up and nearly laughed from sheer disbelief. Adrian had arrived. For a brief moment, surprise flashed across the stranger's face. Then it disappeared. Adrian walked toward the table with calm, measured steps. His expression remained unreadable, but something in the room shifted. Even the stranger seemed aware of it. Good afternoon, Adrian said. I did not realize you were in Chicago. The two men exchanged a look that carried far more meaning than their words. Business brings me everywhere, the stranger replied. Adrian nodded once. Clearly. Silence stretched between them. Not hostile. Just careful. Deliberate. Like two chess players studying the board. Finally the stranger stood. Enjoy your lunch. His attention moved briefly to me. Miss Carter. Then he walked out into the snowy afternoon. The door closed behind him. I folded my arms immediately. Who was that? Adrian watched the window for several seconds before answering. Someone who enjoys gathering information. About me. About everything. I felt irritation replacing uncertainty. You know, my life was significantly less complicated before you started drinking coffee here. To my surprise, Adrian smiled. I have considered that possibility. And I keep coming back anyway. The answer should not have made my heart skip. Yet somehow it did. Outside, snow continued drifting across the city streets. Inside, the coffee had gone cold in my hand. And for the first time, I realized that whatever story had started inside this little restaurant was becoming much bigger than either of us expected. The city looked different after midnight. The traffic faded. The noise softened. Even Chicago seemed to exhale. I was leaving the restaurant later than usual after helping Jenna close when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally I ignored those calls. Something told me not to. Hello. Silence. Then a voice I did not recognize. Miss Carter, you should be careful who you spend time with. The line went dead. I stood frozen on the sidewalk staring at the screen. The cold wind immediately found its way through my coat. Rationally, I knew it could have been a prank. A wrong number. Someone looking for attention. Yet the timing felt wrong. Too precise. The next morning I tried to forget about it. I focused on work. On customers. On keeping my mother's upcoming appointment organized. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Then another surprise arrived. Not a phone call. Not a message. A large bouquet of white lilies appeared at the restaurant addressed to me. Every employee gathered around as if someone had delivered a winning lottery ticket. Who are they from? Jenna asked. I searched for a card. There was one. The message contained only 6 words. Stay away from Adrian Khalil. My stomach dropped. Suddenly the flowers no longer looked beautiful. They looked intentional. Calculated. I immediately carried them outside and left them near the dumpster. 20 minutes later. Adrian walked through the front door. One glance at my face and he knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked. How do you do that? Do what? Know when something is wrong. His expression softened slightly. Because I pay attention. I looked around to make sure no customers were listening. Then I told him about the call. The flowers. The note. Every detail. The more I spoke, the quieter he became. When I finished, he stared out the window for several seconds. I am sorry, he said. The apology caught me completely off guard. You did not send them. No. Then why are you apologizing? His jaw tightened. Because I think I know why they were sent. For the first time since meeting him, I saw genuine frustration behind his calm exterior. Not directed at me. Directed at himself. Emily, there are people who dislike me. I laughed despite the tension. That might be the understatement of the century. A faint smile appeared and disappeared just as quickly. Perhaps. Then he grew serious again. I never wanted any part of my world to reach yours. The words settled heavily between us. My world. Yours. Until that moment I had never realized how carefully he separated the two. Adrian, I said quietly, I am not afraid. His eyes met mine immediately. I know. Then what are you worried about? For several seconds he did not answer. Outside, snow drifted past the windows in slow white spirals. Inside, the restaurant hummed with ordinary life. Finally he spoke. I am worried because you matter now. The admission hung in the air between us. Honest. Unplanned. Impossible to take back. And for the first time since this strange story began, I realized that whatever choice came next would not only change my life. It might change his too. The confession stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it sounded like something from a movie. But because Adrian Khalil was not the kind of man who said things he did not mean. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I smiled at customers. Delivered meals. Refilled coffee cups. Yet part of my mind remained stuck on those 4 words. You matter now. By the time I arrived home, snow covered the sidewalks in a fresh layer of white. The city looked quieter. Softer. I climbed the stairs to my apartment carrying groceries in one hand and my mother's medication in the other. She was sitting in her favorite chair when I walked in, wrapped in a blanket and watching an old black and white movie. Long day, she asked. You have no idea. She smiled knowingly. Mothers always seem to know more than they admitted. Over the next few days, life settled into an uneasy routine. The phone calls stopped. No more flowers arrived. No more mysterious notes appeared. For the first time in weeks, things felt normal. Or at least as normal as they could, with Adrian becoming a regular part of my life. Then Thursday evening happened. The restaurant was unusually quiet. A snowstorm had kept most people home. Only a handful of customers occupied booths near the windows. Adrian sat at his usual table reading one of his books. I approached carrying a fresh cup of coffee. You know, I said. Most people would eventually get tired of the same restaurant. Without looking up, he replied. Most people would not find the same waitress waiting for them. I rolled my eyes. That was smooth. No, he said, finally closing the book. That was honest. Before I could answer, my manager called me toward the office. Apparently a supplier had delivered the wrong inventory order. 20 minutes disappeared into paperwork and phone calls. When I finally returned to the dining room, Adrian was standing near the front windows staring out at the storm. Something felt different immediately. His shoulders were tense. His expression distant. What happened? I asked. He hesitated. Nothing you need to worry about. Adrian. He looked at me. Trust me. I do trust you. The answer surprised both of us. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I added quietly, that is why I know something is wrong. A faint smile appeared before fading again. You really are impossible. I have been told that. He glanced outside once more. Snow swirled beneath the streetlights. The city beyond the glass looked cold and endless. Finally he exhaled. Emily, my entire life people have wanted something from me. Money. Influence. Favors. Opportunities. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the weight beneath it. You are the first person who never asked for anything. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Maybe because I never needed those things. Exactly. His eyes met mine. That is why losing your respect scares me more than losing anything else. The words settled between us like falling snow. Quiet. Gentle. Impossible to ignore. For the first time since we met, neither of us hid behind jokes or arguments. There was only honesty. Raw and simple. Outside, the storm continued covering the city in white. Inside, beneath the warm glow of restaurant lights, I realized something important. Somewhere between the arguments, the curiosity, and the unexpected conversations, Adrian Khalil had stopped being a mystery. He had become someone I genuinely cared about. And judging by the look in his eyes, he had realized the exact same thing. The snow was gone by the time spring arrived. Chicago looked brighter somehow. The gray skies that had followed us for months finally gave way to sunlight, and the city felt alive again. People filled the sidewalks. Patio tables appeared outside restaurants. The lake reflected endless blue instead of winter steel. Life moved forward. Miller's Grill was busier than ever that Friday afternoon. The lunch rush had packed every booth. Coffee steamed from freshly filled mugs. Conversations overlapped beneath the familiar hum of dishes and laughter. Felt like any other day. Yet something about it felt different too. Maybe it was because my mother's health had improved. Maybe it was because the strange tension that had surrounded Adrian for weeks had finally faded. Or maybe it was because I had stopped wondering whether he would walk through the door. He always did. Right on schedule, the restaurant bell chimed. I looked up from carrying a tray and smiled before I could stop myself. Adrian noticed immediately. That smile is becoming a habit, he said as I approached his table. So is your coffee addiction. I have worse qualities. That remains under investigation. He laughed softly and sat down. The sound no longer surprised me. Months ago, I would have considered it impossible. Now it felt natural, comfortable, familiar. As I poured his coffee, I noticed several customers glancing in our direction. Not because of him, because of us. The realization made me smile. Somewhere along the way, our strange friendship had become visible to everyone around us. What? Adrian asked. Nothing. Emily. I shook my head. I was just thinking how ridiculous this is. You will need to be more specific. A few months ago, I thought you were arrogant. Only a few months ago? Do not interrupt. His smile widened. Continue. I leaned against the edge of the booth. I thought you were impossible. Controlling. Intimidating. And now? I looked directly into his eyes. Now I think you spend too much money on coffee. For a second he simply stared at me. Then he laughed harder than I had ever heard before. Several customers turned toward us. Even Jenna nearly dropped a menu. The moment felt light, effortless, real. Eventually the laughter faded. Adrian grew quiet, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. He glanced around the restaurant, the worn booths, the old photographs hanging on the walls, the familiar rhythm of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Then he looked back at me. Do you remember the first night we met? Unfortunately, you called me a coward. You earned it. He nodded. I did. The admission caught me off guard. Adrian Khalil was many things, but he did not apologize easily. He set his coffee cup down carefully. Emily, I spent most of my life believing respect came from power. The restaurant noise seemed to fade around us. Then I met a waitress who proved me wrong. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Before I could answer, he continued. You taught me something I should have learned years ago. What is that? A warm smile appeared on his face, the kind that reached his eyes this time. That character matters more than status. That kindness is not weakness. And that the strongest person in a room is often the one who has nothing to prove. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, painting golden patterns across the table. Finally I smiled. That is probably the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. It is also true. Outside, the city continued moving beneath the bright afternoon sky. Inside, coffee cooled between us while conversations rose and fell around the restaurant. Everything looked exactly the same as it had on the day we met. Yet everything had changed. Adrian came into Miller's Grill believing influence could open any door. Instead, he found something far more valuable. Not admiration. Not obedience. Respect. And somehow, in teaching him that lesson, I learned one too. Sometimes the people who change your life are not the ones who agree with you. They are the ones brave enough to challenge you to become better.